It was late summer in the north, and the winds carried more than just the smell of snow and pine. Whispers. They had started as harmless gossip, but slowly turned sharp, dangerous like a blade hidden under a cloak. Jon Snow stood outside the gates of Winterfell, watching the men ride in with banners of the stag. King Robert Baratheon was visiting, and the entire castle had been preparing for days. Jon wasn't allowed at the main feast. He was just the bastard son of Lord Eddard Stark, and though Ned treated him kindly, Catelyn's cold stares and distance reminded Jon where he stood. But something felt different this time. That night, while the feast roared inside the great hall, Jon sat alone in the stables, feeding Ghost. Benjen Stark, his uncle from the Night's Watch, came to see him. They spoke a little, and Benjen told him of the dangers beyond the wall. Jon felt drawn to that life, hard, cold, but honest. No lies, no pretending. But then came Maester Luwin. He found Jon under the moonlight and said softly, "Your Lord Father wants to see you, now." Jon was confused. He never got called in when the king was around. He entered the small chamber where Ned waited alone, serious as stone. "Jon," he said quietly, "I have something to tell you. Something I should have told you long ago. But now I must." Jon's heart beat louder than the silence. "You are not my son. You are the son of Lyanna Stark, my sister." Jon blinked. "Then who is my father?" Ned looked away. "Rhaegar Targaryen." The world stopped. Jon's knees felt weak. "That means—" "You are not a Snow. Your real name is Jaehaerys Targaryen. You have Targaryen blood and a claim to the Iron Throne. But you must never speak of this, Jon. If Robert finds out, he will kill you, like he did all the others." But that night, Jon did not sleep. He couldn't. His mind swirled. Why had he suffered so long, unloved and forgotten? Why had he been treated like dirt while his blood was royal? And more than that, if Robert had killed Rhaegar's children, if he hunted Targaryens like animals, didn't that mean Jon was a hunted wolf too? Jon looked at Winterfell's cold stone walls and thought, "How much longer will I stay quiet?" Days passed. Robert stayed. He drank and laughed and insulted Targaryens like they were vermin. Jon watched, listened, remembered every word. Then came the day Jon met someone unexpected. Varys. He came at night, hooded, whispering in riddles. "The realm needs balance. Fire is not always madness. Some dragons are meant to return." At first, Jon thought it was nonsense. But then Varys said something that chilled him. "You are not alone. There are still those who remember your family's true rule. They are waiting for a leader, not a Stark, not a Baratheon, a dragon." Jon's heart ached with fear and fire. "Why would they follow me?" he asked. "Because you are a symbol, a rightful heir, a better hope than the drunk stag on the throne." Something awoke in Jon that night, a question that would not go away. What if I could be more than just a bastard? The days after Varys's visit were a blur for Jon. He couldn't eat, he couldn't train, his mind burned like wildfire. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel lost. He felt angry, angry that his entire life had been a lie. Angry that he had been raised as a bastard, looked down on by lords and ladies, when he was born with royal blood, the blood of dragons. He started watching everything around him more closely, the guards, the visitors, even his own family. He noticed how Robert mocked everything Targaryen, not knowing one was under the same roof. He saw how Littlefinger whispered into ears like a snake, and he saw how his father, no, his uncle, walked around with a weight that bent his back lower every day. Then it happened, the moment that pushed Jon past the edge. Robert, drunk and loud in the great hall, stood up during the feast and shouted, "The Targaryens were filth! Mad, cruel, incestuous demons. I killed Rhaegar myself. And if another one ever showed up, I'd rip out his heart too. Everyone laughed. Even Sansa smiled. Jon sat in the shadows and stared at the king, his fists clenched so tightly his nails broke skin. Ghost growled beside him, sensing the fury in his master. That night, Jon left Winterfell. He rode out with Ghost into the dark woods, away from the watchful eyes of the court. He went north, but not to the wall. He met a rider, a man with a scarred face and golden eyes, a messenger sent by Varys. "There are those who would die for the Dragon Prince," the man said. "But first, you must decide, do you want to rule or do you want to hide?" Jon looked at the horizon, the snow-covered trees, the stars above. "I'm done hiding." Within weeks, whispers spread across the north. Wild ones, dangerous ones. They said a dragon had awakened in Winterfell, that Ned Stark's bastard was not truly a bastard, that he had vanished, and with him so had several loyal northern bannermen. Small folk spoke of it in hushed tones by firelight, lords exchanged nervous glances over wine, and Robert laughed it off. Snow, that little pup, let him play rebellion in the woods. He'll freeze before he marches. But Jon wasn't playing. He was gathering. North of Winterfell, Jon met with old clans. The mountain folk, forgotten by most of the realm, remembered the name Targaryen. Some had fought for Rhaegar at the Trident. Others hated Robert for the taxes and the bloody leeches from King's Landing. They listened as Jon stood before them, not as a bastard, but as a prince. "I am Jon Snow no longer," he said, his voice calm but sharp like Valyrian steel. "I am Jaehaerys Stormborn, son of Rhaegar, and I will no longer kneel to a drunken usurper who killed my kin." The wind howled through the trees as silence fell. Then came the first sword raised, followed by another, and another. Within days, Jon had 500 men under his banner, a white direwolf on black surrounded by dragonfire. He sent ravens to every house in the north. Some ignored it, some sent back threats, but some remembered. The north had not forgotten the madness of Aerys, true, but they also remembered the burning of Rickard Stark, the betrayal of Brandon, the way Robert used Ned's loyalty and left the north to rot while the south feasted. Slowly, the rebellion grew teeth. Jon did not ride alone anymore. At his side were warriors and outlaws, a grizzled fighter named Harwin, who had once served with Rhaegar's guards, a sharp-tongued woman named Sarah, exiled from Lys, but deadly with a blade, and Maester Roland, a quiet man with old scrolls and dangerous knowledge. Jon's eyes changed too. They were colder now, sharper. No longer the eyes of a lost boy in the shadows of Winterfell. These were the eyes of a dragon remembering its fire. Back in King's Landing, Varys stood in the Red Keep, watching the black ravens fly. Littlefinger whispered in Cersei's ear. Robert slammed his goblet down and growled, "He wants a war. I'll give him one. I'll march north myself and burn him out like the rats he's hiding with." But Varys only smiled faintly and said, "Be careful, Your Grace. Some rats bite back." Snow fell thick over the north, covering the forests and hills like a white shroud. But beneath that cold silence, war was stirring. Jon No, Jaehaerys Targaryen, stood atop a ridge near Deepwood Motte, eyes narrowed at the road below. His scouts had returned with news. Robert Baratheon wasn't laughing anymore. He had sent assassins. 3 riders in black had entered the north quietly, cloaked and silent. They wore no banners, but they carried the king's gold, and his orders kill the Targaryen bastard before his fire spreads. They reached one of the small keeps loyal to Jon's cause and slaughtered a family in their sleep, hoping to draw him out. It worked, but not the way Robert hoped. Jon didn't run. He hunted. With Ghost beside him and Harwin leading a dozen silent blades, Jon tracked the assassins through the forest like a wolf in the dark. When they found the campfire, Jon didn't wait for speeches. He attacked. Swift, brutal, without mercy. The first man never saw the blade that cut his throat. The second tried to fight, but Harwin crushed his skull with a hammer. The third tried to run. Jon shot an arrow straight through his back. When it was over, blood soaked the snow. Harwin spat beside one of the bodies. So this is Robert's way of answering a threat? Murder in the dark. Jon stared at the flames, his eyes cold. He fears me. Good. Let him fear. They left the bodies hanging from trees with a message carved into a plank of wood. The North remembers. The dragon has teeth. That message spread faster than wildfire. By the time word reached King's Landing, Robert was boiling with rage. He smashed a wine goblet across the room and screamed, "A boy, a bastard boy dares to challenge me. I crushed his father, I'll crush him too." But behind his fury was fear. He ordered Ned Stark to return south immediately, blaming him for letting the pup off his leash. Ned refused. He sent back a raven that simply said, "Jon Snow is not mine to command." Cersei was worse. Her eyes gleamed with cruelty. Why not send the mountain? Let him ride north and burn whatever den the boy's hiding in. But Varys, ever the whisperer, warned, "If you send fire to the north, your grace, you may awaken something worse than dragons. The north bends slow, but when it does, it breaks kingdoms." Robert cursed him and sent out orders anyway. A southern force, 2,000 men under Sir Gawain of House Harrenhal, was sent marching up the King's Road to restore order. But the north was ready. Jon had already united several small houses under his banner, Mormont, Glover, and even a few young Karstarks. They came not for gold or titles, but for belief, for vengeance, for honor. When he heard of the southern host approaching, Jon didn't wait for them to reach his gates. He went to meet them in the forested pass near Widow's Watch, a narrow road with high cliffs and thick woods, perfect for an ambush. Jon's strategy was simple. Use the north's strength, the land, against the enemy. On the morning of the battle, fog rolled in thick, covering the woods like a ghostly curtain. Harrenhal's men marched slowly, nervous in the silence. Then came the howling. Ghost moved like a demon through the mist, striking from the dark, vanishing before they could swing a sword. Arrows rained down from the trees, traps snapped legs, flames rose from wagons. And then came Jon, leading the charge on horseback, sword raised high. For the north, for winter and fire. The southern line broke. Some tried to run, others were cut down. It wasn't a battle, it was a warning. When the fighting stopped, Jon stood in the snow, blood on his blade, his black cloak torn, smoke curling behind him. He looked like a shadow of death, a dragon clothed in wolfskin. They captured Sir Gawain alive. Jon didn't kill him. Instead, he sent him back south with a message. "The boy you tried to kill stands taller than your crown. Tell your king, I am coming." In the Red Keep, Robert read the message with shaking hands. He dropped it into the fire and whispered to himself, "Rhaegar's ghost walks again." And in the shadows, Varys smiled. The fire was spreading faster than anyone in the south had expected. Jon's rebellion wasn't just a northern tantrum anymore. It was becoming a storm. And every raven that flew south carried the same dreadful message. The dragon has risen. But Jon knew this wasn't enough. Winning one skirmish in a fog-covered forest didn't mean victory. Robert would send more. Larger armies, gold cloaks, perhaps even Lannister steel. And once the snow melted, the real war would begin. So Jon made a bold choice. He would leave the north. Against the advice of Harwin and many of his bannermen, Jon rode south under the cover of darkness with a small, trusted party: Ghost, Sarah of Lys, Maester Roland, and 3 northern guards. His destination? Not a castle, not a battlefield. Essos. He would seek out what made his bloodline feared, not just swords or loyalty, dragons. It took weeks by ship, avoiding royal ports and slipping through smuggler routes, but Jon finally set foot in Pentos, a city bloated with wealth and shadows. Sarah, with her connections in the Free Cities, arranged a meeting with a powerful figure, Illyrio Mopatis, a merchant lord who once had ties with House Targaryen. Illyrio welcomed Jon into his lavish manse with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. So, the bastard rises at last, or should I say, Prince Jaehaerys. Jon didn't waste time with niceties. You knew my father. Illyrio nodded slowly. Rhaegar was dream and fire. He believed in prophecy. He thought his child would save the world. Then he leaned closer, his heavy rings clinking. But now the child is here, alive, and full of rage. Jon's voice was calm. I don't want a throne built on ashes, but I will not live under a crown stained with my father's blood. Illyrio laughed. Spoken like a king already. They spoke long into the night. Illyrio had contacts, allies, ships, gold, and most importantly, rumors. He told Jon of ancient vaults in Valyria where dragon eggs were still said to exist. He spoke of sorcerers and fire priests who believed the dragon prince would return in flame and fury. But then came the greatest surprise. There's another, Illyrio said softly. Another Targaryen, across the sea. Jon's brow furrowed. Daenerys? Illyrio nodded. She is in Meereen, and she has what you seek. Not just blood. Dragons, 3 of them, alive and growing. The fire in Jon's chest surged. He'd never met Daenerys, only heard whispers through Roland's old scrolls. The exiled sister, the girl bride sold to the Dothraki, the mother of dragons. If she truly lived, and if she truly had dragons, then they weren't enemies. They were kin. Back in Westeros, Robert's patience was dying. Jon Snow was out of reach, and the North was no longer whispering, it was roaring. Several Riverland houses had gone silent, not sending men or coin. Even the Stormlands had lords questioning why they should fight for a king who drank himself stupid every night. Ned Stark had sealed Winterfell's gates. Robb, now a man grown, had begun raising forces without asking the crown's permission. The North wasn't bending, it was breaking. And in the Red Keep, the tension thickened like old blood. Cersei hissed, "You should have killed the boy the moment he was born." Robert growled, "I thought he was Ned's damn bastard. Don't blame me for Stark's lies." Littlefinger, always with a smile, offered poison. "If the North rises with a dragon at its head, perhaps we burn the North." But Varys said nothing. He simply listened. And when the council ended, he went quietly to his little birds. "The time has come," he whispered. "Tell the Spider Queen, the boy crossed the sea, the fire must meet the flame." In Meereen, Daenerys Targaryen sat upon her throne of carved wood and polished steel, stroking the scaled head of her largest dragon, Drogon. Her silver hair glowed in the firelight as a eunuch entered the hall, holding a scroll sealed with wax, bearing a direwolf in flame. Her eyes narrowed as she read the name. Jaehaerys Targaryen. She had never known a brother by that name. But the words were clear. "Daughter of the storm, I do not come to claim your throne. I come as kin, I come as blood, and I come to make fire whole again." She rose slowly. "Prepare a ship," she said, her voice quiet but commanding. "If he is truly of my house, then he is not my rival. He is my weapon." The game had changed. The North was rising. The dragons were stirring, and for the first time in 20 years, the Baratheon crown sat uneasy upon the usurper's brow. The sea was calm, but Jon's thoughts were not. His ship, black-sailed and silent, cut through the waters of Slaver's Bay under the moonlight. The closer they got to Meereen, the heavier his chest felt. Not from fear, Jon was past fear, but from uncertainty. He was about to meet Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, breaker of chains, and rightful queen in her own right. Would she welcome him as kin, or see him as a rival? Sarah leaned against the rail beside him, watching the horizon. "You've crossed half the world, Jon. If she sees you as a threat, do you still plan to reason?" Jon didn't answer at first. His fingers tapped the hilt of his sword. "I didn't come to fight her," he said finally, "but I won't kneel either." "Then you may not leave Meereen alive," Sarah said softly. Jon glanced at her. "Then I'll die standing like my father, like my true father." In Meereen, Daenerys stood at the top of the Great Pyramid, her dragons circling in the smoky air above. When Jon arrived, the city was quiet. The people whispered about him already, the northern prince with the blood of ice and fire. He entered the throne chamber flanked by Ghost, who growled softly, and Sarah at his side. The moment was thick with tension, but Jon didn't flinch. Daenerys looked down at him, her silver hair shining like moonlight. She was beautiful, but her eyes, they held power, sadness, and something Jon hadn't expected: curiosity. "You call yourself Jaehaerys," she said, "but that name belongs to the old kings." Jon nodded. "Then let me be the first to make it new. You claim to be Rhaegar's son. I knew him. He had no living children." Jon stepped forward. "He did. I am the son of Lyanna Stark, born in the Tower of Joy, hidden to protect me from Robert's wrath. Ned Stark raised me as his own, but the truth was never his to tell." Daenerys said nothing for a moment. Her eyes searched his face like a flame licking dry wood. "Prove it." Jon reached into his coat and handed her a sealed scroll written in Maester Roland's hand, with the Stark and Targaryen seals side by side. Proof of his birth, witnesses, records, sworn by those who had died to keep the truth hidden. Daenerys read it in silence. When she finished, her hands trembled slightly. "So, you're the dragon hidden in the snow." Jon didn't answer. She stepped down from her throne slowly. "Why come here? To take what's mine?" Jon shook his head. "I want peace between us. I want the throne in Robert's hands to fall, but not to see more fire consume the world. If we fight each other, we lose. The realm needs something new. Not just a king, not just a queen. It needs something better." She looked at him, long and hard. Then she whispered, "Perhaps it needs both." That night, they spoke not as royals, but as survivors of the past, of pain, of fire and snow. Daenerys told him of Khal Drogo, of slavery, of her dragons born from death. Jon told her of Winterfell, of being called bastard, of watching his father know his uncle die in the south. They drank wine under the stars. Ghost curled beside Drogon, the two beasts eyeing each other warily. "You remind me of Rhaegar," Daenerys said softly. "I don't even remember him," Jon replied. "Maybe that's why you'll be better." 3 days later, a raven arrived, one from the north. Ned Stark had been arrested. Cersei, furious at the North's silence and Jon's rebellion, had him taken as a traitor. He was to be tried in King's Landing and likely executed. The realm was bracing for war. Jon read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking. "He raised me. He protected me when the world would have had me killed in the cradle, and now he's going to die in chains." Daenerys looked at him with fire in her eyes. "Then we break the chains." She walked to the balcony and whistled, once sharp, loud, 3 shadows passed overhead. The dragons were ready. Jon turned to her, eyes locked. "You'll help me save him?" Daenerys nodded. "We'll burn down the gates of King's Landing if we have to. If the lions want a war, we'll give them fire and blood." Back in Westeros, Robert heard the rumors first. Jon Snow had met Daenerys. They had not killed each other. Worse, they were marching together. North and East had become one. He looked into his wine, finally understanding something that had come too late. The Targaryens hadn't been destroyed. They had been waiting. The cold winds of Westeros were not ready for the storm that was coming. From the east came fire, 3 dragons tearing across the sky, their roars shaking the heavens. And from the north came fury, hardened northern men, cloaked in snow and vengeance, marching under banners that had long been hidden, black and silver, wolf and flame. Jon and Daenerys had united. They didn't land at King's Landing. Not yet. Their first strike was meant to send a message, one the Lannisters couldn't ignore. So they chose Harrenhal. The cursed castle, once the grandest in the realm, now stood half-broken and rotting, held by Lannister soldiers under Sir Tybalt Lefford. A proud man, cruel, known for his brutal raids into Riverland's villages, who had refused to send men to Robert. Jon had heard the stories how Tybalt's men butchered children in front of their fathers, how they sent raven cages filled with severed tongues to Riverrun. It was time someone made him choke on his pride. Jon's war council gathered in a ruined farmhouse near Harrenhal's outer woods. Daenerys sat across from him, a fire crackling between them. "We strike at dawn," Jon said. "Tybalt thinks the north is still gathering. He doesn't know we've already crossed the Vale." "We'll give him a dragon's wake-up call," Daenerys smirked. Sarah leaned forward. "We should hit fast, get in and out. If you burn the whole castle, the Riverlands might fear you." Daenerys glanced at her. "They've feared Harrenhal for generations. If we turn it to ash, maybe they'll hope again." Harwin, Jon's hardened sword brother, added, "The men are ready. We've got scouts in the trees. The moment you give the word, we strike." Jon stood slowly, gripping the hilt of Longclaw. "No prisoners," he said. "Not this time. Not after what he did." The sky burned red before the sun even rose. Drogon descended from the clouds like death on wings, fire spilling from his jaws and crashing into Harrenhal's upper towers. The stone shrieked as it cracked and fell. Soldiers screamed, running from barracks as Daenerys, atop her dragon, unleashed fire from above. On the ground, Jon led the charge through the broken gates. His northern warriors poured in, cutting down Lannister men like wolves tearing through deer. Sir Tybalt tried to rally his forces, but panic had already spread. The sound of wings above, the scent of smoke and ash, it shattered their courage. Jon found Tybalt in the courtyard, dragging a servant girl by the arm, trying to flee through the stables. "Let her go," Jon said, stepping into the ash with Longclaw drawn. Tybalt turned, sneering. "You're the bastard, the snowflake claiming dragon blood?" "I'm the storm that ends you," Jon said, and charged. Their blades clashed steel on steel, fury against cruelty. Tybalt was a strong knight, but Jon fought like a man possessed, each strike fueled by every Riverland's cry he'd heard. He broke Tybalt's sword and drove Longclaw through his chest, watching the red lion fall in silence. By midday, Harrenhal belonged to the Targaryens once more. Daenerys landed near the gates, Drogon folding his wings behind her as smoke curled from his nostrils. Jon stood waiting for her, blood on his armor, but calm. "It's done," he said. She looked at him, fire in her eyes. "No," she replied, "this is only the beginning." The fall of Harrenhal sent shockwaves across the realm. In Riverrun, House Tully raised its banners again, siding with Jon. The Blackfish himself came out of hiding to lead troops under the Dragon Wolf sigil. In the Vale, young lords whispered about turning against the crown. Even the Iron Islands began stirring, sensing that the tides were changing. But in King's Landing, chaos ruled. Robert, once a proud warrior, now staggered drunkenly through the Red Keep, screaming about dragons in his sleep. Cersei had begun issuing commands in his name without his consent. Jaime Lannister sharpened his sword daily. And Ned Stark? He was locked in the dungeons, alone, cold, awaiting death. But one raven had reached him, smuggled in by a Varys loyalist. Inside was a single line in a hand he recognized. "I'm coming for you, Jay." Ned stared at the parchment, a strange thing growing in his heart. Hope. That night, in the broken halls of Harrenhal, Jon stood beside Daenerys as they stared into the fire. "He'll send everything he has next," Jon said. "The crown, the Lannisters, the South won't just surrender." Daenerys looked at him, her voice soft. "Then we burn their fear into history." Jon didn't speak for a moment. Then he turned to her. "Not fear," he said. "Justice. I want to tear down Robert's throne, not just to take it, but to build something better." Daenerys stared at him, her eyes glowing in the firelight. "Then, let's break the wheel together." Their hands met dragon and wolf, ice and fire. And far above them, Drogon roared into the night sky, his flame painting the stars. The road to King's Landing was soaked in blood before Jon and Daenerys ever reached its gates. Their victory at Harrenhal had split the realm wide open. Lords who once pledged loyalty to Robert began to question his crown. Some fled their castles, others bent the knee to the Dragon-Wolf alliance. But those loyal to the Lannisters, they prepared for war. And no one prepared more viciously than Cersei Lannister. She saw the fire coming long before it reached the capital. While Robert drowned himself in wine and whores, she sharpened her mind and her knives. Jaime begged her to pull the crown back from the brink, but she refused. "They want to take my children's future," she snapped. "They want to end the lions. I won't let them. I'll burn the world first." So she set a trap. As Jon and Daenerys marched south with 20,000 troops and 3 dragons in the sky, a raven came from Storm's End, supposedly sent by Lord Edric Baratheon, a minor cousin of Robert. He offered a truce. He claimed to have men, ships and gold, and promised to betray the crown in exchange for being named Warden of the Stormlands once Robert fell. Jon was wary. "This smells like bait," he told Daenerys. "No Baratheon sends kindness in a raven." Daenerys agreed. But Sarah, ever the voice of ambition, saw opportunity. "If it's real," she said, "you could take Storm's End and cut the Lannisters off from the sea. If it's false, well, the dragons are still yours." After much debate, Jon agreed, but with caution. He sent half his army ahead toward Duskendale, a path that would bring them closer to King's Landing. He and Daenerys would ride to Storm's End with a smaller force and scout the truth. It was a mistake. Storm's End was quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. The gates opened without a fight. The courtyard was empty. No banners, no soldiers, just silence. Jon's eyes scanned the walls. "This isn't right." Then Ghost growled, and the sky cracked with a thunderous roar. Scorpions, giant crossbows mounted on the ramparts, hidden beneath canvas, now revealed, trained not on Jon, but on the dragons. Before Daenerys could scream, the first bolt fired. It missed Drogon by inches, but the second bolt didn't. Rhaegal shrieked as the steel bolt pierced his shoulder. Blood sprayed, wings buckled. He spiraled downward, crashing into the outer wall, his cries shaking the earth. Daenerys screamed in fury, guiding Drogon into the air, fire spilling from his mouth. Jon turned to his men. Ambush! Fall back! But they were already under attack. From the towers poured Lannister soldiers. Hidden behind the walls, they emerged like shadows, cutting, stabbing, screaming. Jon fought like a madman, Longclaw flashing in the dim light. Sarah cut down 3 men before getting slashed across her thigh. Harwin was shot in the chest by an archer above. Daenerys swooped low, raining fire, but she couldn't risk burning her own men. It was chaos, and it was exactly what Cersei had planned. They barely escaped. Jon, Daenerys, Sarah, and a few survivors fled through a broken tunnel under the keep, once used for smuggling. Rhaegal limped into the forest beyond, bleeding and weak. They didn't stop until nightfall, collapsing near a burned-out village. Daenerys was shaking with rage. She knew, she spat. She set this up. She knew I'd come. She wants to kill us before we reach the gates, Jon said, wiping blood from his brow. She doesn't want a war. She wants an execution. Sarah groaned, clutching her wound. We walked into her claws. Jon clenched his jaw. No. We walked into her trap, but now we know what kind of war she's waging. Not one of honor, one of poison. Daenerys turned to him, fire in her eyes. Then we answer with fire. Jon nodded, but his voice was heavy. We will, but not like her. We don't win by becoming monsters. She looked at him for a long time, then finally said, Then let me be the fire, and you be the shield. In the Red Keep, Cersei stood above the walls, smiling as smoke from Storm's End drifted in the distance. They won't forget this, she said. Beside her, Qyburn smiled coldly. Nor will the dragons. She turned to the city behind her, to the scared people, the desperate lords, the whispered rebellions, and she smiled wider. Let them come, she whispered. I've prepared something far worse than wildfire. Back in the forests beyond the Reach, Jon sat alone beneath the stars. Rhaegal's wing was shattered. His army was scattered. His blood burned with fury. But his mind remained clear. This isn't over, he whispered. She's shown her teeth. Now we show her the storm. And from the shadows came the Blackfish, with new men from the Vale. We're with you, Snow, he said, to the gates of hell if need be. Jon looked south. That's exactly where we're going. The air over King's Landing had never felt heavier, thick with smoke, tension, and the weight of 20 years of blood. The city stood braced behind high walls and golden armor, guarded by Lannister soldiers, sellswords, and scorpions mounted on every tower. Cersei had turned the capital into a cage made of steel, fire, and fear. But even cages can burn, and fire was coming. Jon Snow stood at the edge of Blackwater Bay, his cloak stained with blood and ash, the wolf and dragon banner whipping in the wind behind him. His army, what was left of it, had finally joined with the Riverlords and the men from the Vale. A united force, hardened by betrayal and loss. Beside him, Daenerys watched the horizon, her silver hair braided like a crown. Rhaegal was grounded, his wing bound and broken, but Drogon circled above, casting a long shadow over the sea. The people of the city had already begun whispering, "The last dragon waits." Jon spoke to the men before the final march. "We do not come for slaughter," he said, his voice sharp but steady. "We come to end one. We do not burn cities," he continued. "We tear down tyrants, we break chains, and we fight not for a throne, but for those who can't fight for themselves." Cheers followed, but they were not wild. They were grim, determined. These men had seen too much to cheer blindly. Daenerys stepped forward. "My family built this city, and my enemies drowned it in blood. Today, I take it back not for revenge, but for justice." The army moved. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei stood before her map room, her fingers tracing the stone walls of Westeros. She wore black, her crown dark as obsidian, her face unreadable. "They've arrived," Qyburn whispered. Cersei nodded. "Let them." The trap was already set. Beneath the city, barrels of wildfire had been placed in tunnels, not to destroy the enemy, but to destroy everything. "If they take the walls," she said coldly, "light the fuse." "But the people," Qyburn hesitated. Cersei turned to him, eyes cold. "They are not my people, if they let dragons rule them." The first strike came with sunrise. Drogon swooped down from the clouds, his scream echoing through the city as fire engulfed the outer towers. The Scorpions fired, but Daenerys had learned she moved fast, low, unpredictable. One by one, the weapons fell. Jon's army stormed the gates. The Lannisters fought hard and died faster. Within hours, the outer defences were overrun. Jon fought at the front, Longclaw cleaving through steel and bone. He moved like a shadow, like a storm in the flesh, driven not by rage, but by purpose. He reached the city walls just as the gates burst open. Chaos flooded in. But something was wrong. The bells never rang. In the city centre, civilians screamed and ran, caught between fire and steel. Daenerys hovered above on Drogon, watching the carnage, her face frozen. Jon had told her to wait, to let the bells ring, to give the city one last chance. But they didn't. And then, a blast rocked the city from below. Green fire exploded beneath the streets. Wildfire. A trap, Cersei's trap. Hundreds of innocents burned alive in seconds. The streets turned to hell. The sky glowed green. Jon watched in horror from the gate. "She lit the city herself," he gasped. Daenerys screamed in fury. But she didn't burn the people. She flew straight to the Red Keep. Inside, Cersei stood calmly in her throne room as ash fell like snow through shattered windows. She still believed, truly believed, that somehow she would win, that fate would turn for her one more time. But fate had never been kind to tyrants. Daenerys landed on the balcony. Drogon roared behind her. Cersei didn't move. "So you finally made it," she said coldly. "Come to burn another kingdom to ash." "No," Daenerys said, stepping forward. "Only the rot inside it." She didn't give a speech. She didn't scream. She simply walked forward and plunged a Valyrian steel dagger into Cersei's chest. The lioness gasped, then fell. When Jon arrived moments later, he found Daenerys alone on the throne, blood on her hands, ash in her hair. Drogon loomed above, smoke rising from his nostrils. "It's over," she said quietly. Jon nodded. "Not yet." He turned, walked to the balcony, and raised his sword. Below, the armies watched, and Jon shouted, "The war is done, the tyrant is dead. Let the realm rise free, not under fire, not under fear, but under truth." In the days that followed, Jon and Daenerys stood before the realm. They did not crown themselves. Instead, they declared a council of lords and people to build a new rule, a council that would choose leaders, not be born to them. Jon refused the Iron Throne. Daenerys, too, stepped aside. And, for the first time in history, Westeros was not ruled by blood, but by choice. In the end, the boy who was called a bastard and the girl who was sold for a crown became the ones who broke the cycle. Together.